disappearing with the bag full of profits going on to somewhere else. It's about creating spaces that the community uses, values, but also is responsible for. And so there's a concept of ownership and stewardship, so the communities take on these open spaces and then have the ability to kind of use those spaces for their own needs in the future. And they are then protected through covenant as well to make sure that they are there for in perpetuity. So that's very important. And then the final one then is about, because it's an environment plan, it's about maximizing resource efficiency. And also there's this thing about environmental impacts at the end of life. And I think, although it's a little bit of a tenuous link, but certainly some of our big country parks were experiencing how end of life for our products can so sort of terribly affect our countryside with the amount of crisp bags and discarded picnics and so on. So end of life for even things like consumables like food, needs to be thought about. And we are seeing now more biodegradable packaging and so on, but there's still quite a lot of work to do in terms of, sort of bringing the public with us, as it were. They should not just be there to admire the landscape, but they should be there to protect the landscape as well. So we have some pieces of legislation which are going through Parliament. What has been really frustrating is that the Environment Bill was tabled in its almost finished form in January this year, and then COVID came and the Environment Bill went away. But the Environment Bill is now starting to come back again, and it started to get back into the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And what it does is it sets some really hard-hitting targets and goals. Sorry, it aims to set some really hard-hitting targets and goals. Those goals and those targets, some of them have been set, but quite a few of them have still got to be agreed. And so some of the things that are there already is that to protect and enhance 75% of terrestrial and freshwater protected species to a favourable condition. Doesn't say by when. Create or restore 500 or 500,000 hectares of wildlife rich habitat as part of a nature recovery network. Well, that's something that the Wildlife Trust have actually, sort of wrapped their arms around, and are really championing that. Increase tree planting by 30,000 hectares of trees, that's each year by 2030, and the Woodland Trust are obviously the champions of that. And at least 3/4 of waters to be in a natural state as soon as possible, including sustainable abstraction. Oops, I'm going the wrong way here. So this is to be enforced by the end of October, with deadlines for those achievements of the targets by the mid-2030s. So some would say that that's a little bit too late. But also, the Environment Bill gives the government a get out. If they want to change those targets and those goals, they can. It's written in the legislation, which is rather disappointing. There has been a discussion for a long time that we don't have strict powers to be able to prosecute people who contravene environmental laws. And so there's the creation of an Office of Environmental Protection, which is there to do exactly that. And that should really help to sort of support all of those agencies and organisations whose role it is to maintain and look after the environment. But it went through the courts a couple of years ago. And one of the things that isn't in there is climate. So the Climate Change Act of 2008 said that the government, the Prime Minister, in fact, is personally responsible for achieving our climate targets. but that's only in the Act. They haven't translated that into the Office of Environmental Protection. So there isn't an enforcement body in the UK that is designed to hold the Prime Minister to challenge. We talked about the Environment Bill, and it has this biodiversity net gain element. And also what's new is the ability to issue biodiversity credits to provide a market for biodiversity net gain. So what that means is that if a developer feels, that's the wrong word, if a developer demonstrates that they cannot create biodiversity net gain on their site, then those credits can be traded just in the way that we trade carbon credits, so that somebody else within the locality can provide that biodiversity net gain on their behalf. And this is something that our countryside could benefit from, potentially. The right land in the right place. So one of the things that I was looking at recently was where the major developments are going around Melton, and thinking about farmers and landowners. If development in Melton can't achieve biodiversity net gain, who are the farmers and the landowners on the periphery of that who would be able to provide those things? And as we Brexit out, as it were, then we'll talk about this later, but the Common Agricultural Policy is removing financial incentives for farming. So it might be if you have the right land in the right place and you can provide a decent amount of biodiversity in perpetuity, which sometimes in perpetuity just means 25 years, down to the legalese again. But certainly this could be another way of stimulating kind of those peri-urban kind of environments as well. But of course, with that, it's always open to abuse as well. So that's got to be argued when we have our first cases coming through the courts. That's going to be quite interesting. Local nature recovery strategies, we're already seeing those around the UK. And one of the things in the bill is that there's going to be a lot more legislation around the protection of trees, individual trees, street trees, as well as our parkland trees and so on. So if somebody fells a tree illegally, then they will be subject to a restocking order, and that's going to be implemented through the court. So you could be taken to court if you fell a tree illegally. And also what's interesting for us all possibly on this call is that there are going to be the introduction of conservation covenants. So these are voluntary, but once you've engaged in one, you're tied by it. And so this is to stimulate partnerships between conservation bodies or public bodies. So it might be the Environment Agency, it might be Severn Trent, or different organisations who are, or even a private investor, to conserve the natural heritage features of land. And so it's to sort of develop the partnership approach. That's still a little bit wishy-washy. And again, we need to think about what does that mean for our countryside? Who is actually going to be making those decisions? So we would hope that organisations like the Wildlife Trust and ourselves and other bodies will be there, the first choice. But if it was a private investor coming in who would make those decisions, then we've got to think about that as well. The Agriculture Bill is the next piece of legislation that will affect us post-Brexit. And the bill really is designed to move us away from the EU in financial terms. So currently our farmers receive £3.5 billion each year under the Common Agricultural Policy. 80% of that is just related to direct payments based on how much land is farmed. And the rest of the money goes to things like the environment schemes, but also it goes to the Rural Development Programme. So the Common Agricultural Policy, you may or may not know, used to help to fund things like our village halls and our rural way of life. helping to stimulate new little businesses and artisans and so on. So, but from a farming perspective, these direct payments will be phased out bit by 2027. And the new environmental land management scheme will come into place. And on the right-hand side of this slide, these are the 6 areas that the environmental land management scheme will focus upon. Very similar. It's basically taking the 25-year environment plan and focusing it in on farming. But the emphasis here is that farmers and landowners have to provide public goods. So those things on the right-hand side are classed as public goods. But you'll notice in the middle there, beauty, heritage, and engagement. And so you may find that more farmers are getting engaged with their local communities, that these kind of little partnerships are starting to develop where communities are starting to get involved and being engaged in what's happening. And the whole focus is around natural capital, increasing the nature and increasing the functions that ecosystems play as well. So whether that be flood protection, biodiversity, pollination, or any of those things that we looked at earlier, then these are the things that are important. There are three tiers to this. So the first tier is where we're looking at big landscape partnerships, big landscape change. That will probably get engulfed in the nature recovery areas, for example. But then on a local level, it might be that half a dozen farmers or landowners, or 2 or 3 farmers and landowners, maybe in a catchment, get together, and they then have to think about what the problems are with the environment in that area and how collectively that they can solve them. But then also the government are starting to think about some of the really big projects, how we really tackle carbon net zero. So there are some big governmental projects that will be coming forward as well that farmers and landowners can get involved in. Currently, Natural England and the agencies are starting to look at a series of tests and trials. They're looking at 57 different places in the UK, different areas of countryside, to work out how they're going to do this. And they've engaged with 3,500 farmers and landowners to sort of test their ideas. They're hoping to report this autumn on the first phase. Some reporting came through in the summer, but the report showed more questions than answers. And so after having a year or 2 of being able to do this, that we're going to get some really good reports coming through. But the other thing that the Agriculture Bill needs to think about, and it's for the nation's well-being, as it were, is that we've got to improve market conditions post-Brexit. So looking at addressing unfair trading practices. And so we talk about chlorinated chicken and all of those different things. You know, how are we going to trade with our partners, and what does that mean in terms of our own environmental standards in the countryside, things that we know and love and enjoy? And so when how our countryside will be used in the future, you know, I'm sure that none of us will want to sort of to see the deserts and the you know, sort of the railway carriages with livestock in. So I think the 2 of the biggest areas of this is that farmers and landowners, whilst they will be encouraged by Natural England and the agencies and organisations, they have the right to decide themselves on how they will tackle their own environmental problems. But they won't get paid until, well, they won't get paid, they will get paid by results. So there will be a phased payment, a little bit now, a little bit later, and so on and so forth, and then the final payment coming once they have demonstrated that that piece of biodiversity has been achieved, and it's going to be achieved for the long term, or that strip of pollination will be there, or that flooding has been abated, or whatever. But it's down to them to work out how they're going to do it themselves. And so we've been looking, I'm part of some Westminster forums on this topic, and we've been looking at this over the last few months. And what we've kind of, sort of identified is that through the test and trials, for example, is that farmers and landowners are going to need a lot of help and support. And so that's where organisations like ourselves and the Wildlife Trust and so on can really help to to give that support, to help them to learn the skills and to achieve the confidence to be able to make these vast changes as well. So this little slide here, I'm not going to dwell on it too much because we are running out of time, and I do apologise. But I thought this was quite interesting. When you look at Leicestershire on the left and then Rutland on the right, they're not to scale, by the way. All the red hashed areas can show you which areas are currently under the existing countryside stewardship scheme. So we have some rather large pieces of land that are already engaged with environmental improvement. And the green areas show some of the woodland management plans, and the yellow areas are very interesting because they show where the higher tier countryside management schemes are. So they're the farmers and landowners who are making really big capital changes to their landscapes to improve the environment. So it'd be interesting to see how those maps change once this scheme goes and the new Elm scheme comes in. Climate change is, we've committed that we're going to achieve zero carbon emissions. So as I mentioned earlier, there's this commitment to plant all of these trees. And the aim is that that will absorb 10% of our residual greenhouse gas emissions. So our countryside could become more treed. And we all know about the right tree in the right place. And I'm very nervous of policies which say, yes, let's just solve our problems by putting lots and lots of trees in, because that is not the answer. The answer is to think about where our carbon stocks, our carbon is sequestered. And so there's an aim to restore 35,000 hectares of peatlands by 2025. And on the back of that comes the Peatland Protection Code. And peatlands, as you all know, is that they hold carbon, they lock carbon in. And so the aim is to cut national CO2 emissions by 200 million tonnes by 2050. Just goes to show sort of the power of our landscapes. We don't have any targets for soil carbon storage, despite the fact that it holds so much carbon. But a recent study, which actually just focused upon one large country estate, and it was an estate of various different types of habitats, but the arable things that were coming out of it showed that 55 tonnes of carbon per hectare can be achieved in the topsoil, the top 25 centimetres of soil, and 127 tonnes of carbon per hectare in the soil underneath that within the next 10 years. So on the pictures on the right, the bottom picture shows what a field could look like under a no-tillage scheme, a no-tillage measure. So there isn't any drilling, it's direct drilling. As you can see, the plants have been put in and the straw from the previous harvest has been kept in there. And doing something like this not just helps to absorb the carbon, but it also helps to create that more biodiverse soil. So the earthworms will take that straw and they will bring it down and they will break it down. You have a more organic soil as well. So whilst 10 years ago farmers were nervous of this, people are now starting to embrace this and to think, yes, we can, the technology is there, we can do this. Post-COVID, are we really looking at a new way of living? Or is this going to be a temporary blip? So post-COVID, we've got to look at a resilient recovery. Globally, carbon emissions have been reported to fall by, which is not insignificant, but it's temporary. The scientists are saying this is a temporary measure. But the government are starting to recognise that a resilient recovery must mean that we've got to invest in climate resilient, low carbon infrastructure. The things that are going to be in our favour is that we know we're going to get high unemployment, and we've seen schemes for our young people to get into employment. And so green recovery means that there are more jobs going to become available for young people. And we're a City and Guilds training centre in this area, and we work with young people every year and get them into the industry and get them trained with good quality qualifications. And we see that for the work that we do, you know, we can have an impact on that as well. Looking at the other end of the scale, though, one in four adults are over 65. Talk about a COVID landscape. Our older people, our people who may have been retired and would volunteer with the National Trust, or the Wildlife Trust, or any of us organisations because they've got the time to do it, may not be available to us in a COVID situation. But actually, it's our countryside and our nature that can provide them with the greatest rewards. And so finding a way that we can wrap our arms around these people again and help people again is going to be so important, not just for us as organisations, but also for their health and well-being and helping them to stay resilient in these times. The other thing post-COVID is that we've seen it, that the government is suddenly putting out a challenge call where organisations like ourselves might have a fortnight to suddenly develop an idea that solves all of these environmental problems and then come up with a proposal of how we would do that. And because they want to have the big flagship projects happen really quickly, things that can happen at speed to solve big problems. And I worry about that. I think in the long term, I think beyond 4 years, I was very happy to see that the conservation policies of 30 years ago are now starting to bear fruition, in that our red kites are starting to, you know, come back into our landscapes. But that only happened because of what we said we would do 30 years ago. So it takes time. But the things that are really important, the international things that are really important, is that if we work within those sustainable development goals, and we've got the Paris Agreement coming next year, which we'll talk about, is that they are crucial international frameworks that will help to push us towards a greener recovery. So next year, we've got the COP26 being held in Glasgow, an international United Nations conference, and they're going to focus upon nature and biodiversity. And the UK government are extremely proud that we are hosting this next year, because we are seen to be the leaders in monitoring and measuring the environment. And what the COP26 will focus upon is nature-based solutions, with the idea that it will give a win for livelihoods, a win for climate, and a win for biodiversity as well. And as part of this, Natural England have committed to what they call levelling up. So making sure that people have better access to nature. There is now a heightened awareness of the role of nature to our health and well-being, and I'm sure that that will be a part of COP26 as well. But also, in the future, post-COP26, we've got to see how biodiversity net gain and the local nature recovery strategies and so on are delivered so that they are fundamental to our social and our health and our economic and our environmental renewal. And there's a potential framework here. This was put forward as a government proposal to government to say, these are the types of projects that will help us achieve our climate change obligations. And not too bothered about some of the things kind of on the right-hand side of this table. But if you see tree planting and nature restoration, flood and drought resilience, peatland reforestation, and then we've got the renewable energies and so on in there as well, and waste and manure management. So these are no longer sideshows. Nature is really starting to come to the fore in so many areas of political thinking. So I'm almost finished, you'll be very pleased to know. But this is a really nice illustration of how nature will support us and how we will support nature. In the Northeast, I'll just click on this and hopefully this will work. There's a really nice leaflet that the Nature Partnership in the Northeast have created. And hopefully you will see this. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Because I've trawled the internet to try and find what a great picture of an ecosystem, natural capital, biodiverse landscape in Britain might look like. And this is the best that I can find from it. So this illustration shows, I'm looking to the left here, how with a little thought and changing behaviours, we can weave the natural environment into our daily lives and activities and leave a positive legacy for future generations. And so some of the things that it talks about here in the Northeast is that peatlands and woodlands, they've calculated that the peat bogs has the capacity to store the equivalent of up to 2.4 million tonnes of CO2. Kilometre square of CO2. Forestry management and primary processing in the Northeast will employ 1,075 people. Farming and agri-tech can help to store floodwater higher up the catchment here to prevent it from coming into our villages and towns. And we can get better yields by using technology and GPS technology in the fields. The green roofs and green walls will become an element of urban design and will help to deal with surface runoff. And now it is becoming standard practice that sustainable urban drainage systems are being put into all new designs. Education they see as being a fundamental element of this, that outdoor self-directed play is recognised as being one of the best forms of activities for children. Exercise builds up strength and deals with obesity and so on. And access to green spaces, however small, has been shown to have a positive effect on children suffering behavioural or emotional disorders. Well, we at the Sustainable Land Trust have first and direct experience of that. Talks about health and the benefits of health, and then it talks about the benefits of well-being, and then how our landscapes are connected and how pollinators can move throughout the landscapes, and how tourism access the cultural side of our landscapes, and then how businesses, the blue and the green infrastructure that runs through our lives, our landscapes. So I just wanted to show you that because it's just a nice illustration of how a connected landscape can work. So the takeaways from this then is that nature underpins our society in so many different ways, but we sometimes only see it. We don't, but the world sometimes only sees it when we're in a crisis or we've got floods or disease. Nature affects our personal well-being, and our ability to access nature is an issue of equality, not just desire. And we've seen where local communities can really get together and respond on the big issues. David Attenborough reckons that we're smart enough to do this, and I think we are. So I just want to finish off a little bit by saying what you can do. We've become used to looking at the R number, but we've lost sight of the ecological number. And so our individual, our national, our global ecological footprints, as you can see, from 1970, we were using the resources of one planet. By 2012, it was 2.5 planets. by 2050. It's possibly going to be more than 3 planets. And so I think, rather radically, I think that if the government reported upon our ecological footprint, how many planets we are currently at, and Boris Johnson was stood at the podium and saying, we are reaching our R number for our footprint, this is what we're going to do, everybody, then I think that the nation would respond. And if you wanted to calculate your own ecological footprint, you can see how many planets your life takes up. We're expanding a little bit, and we're opening an office in Wales in the new year, hopefully, and we're doing some work already as landowners over there. And the Welsh Government have got a great environmental policy, which really sort of puts the cat amongst the pigeons in terms of development, and it's called One Planet Development. And so in situations where the countryside is very fragile or vulnerable to change, if people wanted to build there, they have to show that their house, their lifestyle can achieve one planet living. Otherwise, they don't get planning permission. And there's a whole load of criteria around that, but it really focuses people's mind. And you know, I would call our English governments to start to think about that as well. So that's a whole load of information, which I am very grateful that you bore with me during my darkest hour, as they say. And I really appreciate you listening to me. I hope you've taken something away from it, something to think about. And I'm looking forward to seeing a better connected rural landscape. And I'm looking forward to my daughter growing up and to making a difference. She may not be the next David Attenborough, but maybe somebody in Leicestershire and Rutland will be. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Kate. That was very interesting. Okay, we've got a few questions. Can you see the Q&A box, or do you need me to?
I've got one question in the Q&A box that I can see.
Oh, that must be in the chat box.
Okay. I can't see anything in the chat. Oh, there's something starting to come through now.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So would you like me just to go through them?
Yes, if you could read them out, as I'm not sure if everybody can see them, and I'll try and find people whose questions they were and allow them to talk, and then if they want to talk to you at the same time.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the first one is from Frank, and Frank, you should be able to talk now.
Yeah, I can I? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi.
So my question was, how do you see environmental sustainability protected under the planning reform proposals with a single criteria for sustainability? You're probably aware that the present legislation, you have 3 pillars of sustainability, namely environmental, economic and social. And I fear that if it's just all subsumed into one, then we're going to see a dumbing down of the environmental protection aspect.
Yes, you're probably right there, Frank. And I think it's going to be interesting because planning policy has changed. I mean, there is EU law which is translated into UK legislation on strategic environmental assessments in planning, and I'm an SEA assessor, and I used to be a trainer in SEA as well in the early days, and so I was involved in some of the very early local authorities where SEA had to be applied as part of a planning policy process. And what I used to get really frustrated about is that a strategic environmental assessment came in 2003-ish, a little bit before that. And then hot off the heels of that came the government guidance on sustainability appraisals, which was great because it took that environment bit and it added the social and it added the equality in terms of economy as well. And so very quickly, we were starting then to look at planning as being those three pillars. And that was really important to sort of make the planning policies a balanced planning policy. The unfortunate thing was that the SEA legislation said, well, that's all well and good, that's great, but you don't have to apply it. This is just for you to, it's a little nice to have. And so some local authorities completely, they had theirs done because they had to have them done, but then they didn't really apply what the recommendations were. And if we do get this dumbing down a little bit more and sort of distillation down into one thing, then it's open to misinterpretation. And we're seeing now that local plans are being developed where the sustainability is in each planning policy, because the idea a few years ago was that planning policy would have this golden thread of sustainability through it. But where are the checks and balances? It's only really when people who understand these things and have got the time to really sort of sift through and sort of think about these things in depth under each planning policy that can pull those inequalities out, if you like. So yes, I'm like you, I'm a little bit worried.
Okay, so our next question is from Malcolm. I'm just going to allow you to talk. Malcolm, if you would like to.
Hi.
Hi, Malcolm.
Yeah. Hey, good evening. Yeah. Yeah, I was interested in the impact of technology as it progresses here, which you didn't really mention. I did try to raise this in the chat when you asked that question early on in your presentation.
Sorry, Malcolm.
So I've put it as a question now, but clearly technology is going to affect the way transport operates with autonomous vehicles and more electric power and so on. Communications, which affects where we work at home, perhaps, shopping. Clearly, and something you did touch on was the impact on agriculture, which it can drive a lot of efficiency into agricultural process, such like. But how do you see all that adding together in terms of its overall climate or environmental impact?
That is a huge question. So now I've got my environmental impact assessment head going on, where I'm going, what are the impacts of this against this? What are the cumulative effects? What's happening? As we move to a more digital society and we rely upon Amazon and so on to sort of serve our needs, then we could see some changes in patterns of transport and technology and so on. And if our young people are used to and grow up living a digital lifestyle, what I worry about is that they won't see the effects of their digital lifestyles, where that transport, where that technology and everything is. I worked for Natural England for a while, and I was involved in a project which was looking at Northamptonshire. And it was huge industrial, huge storage units that were being built. Amazon for the big distribution centres, and because they were the powerhouses of the sort of the transport network, and that could be one of the things that could be one of the offshoots, if you like, about living a more technological lifestyle, is that all the goods and services will come in through one area and then sort of stream out to the rest of the UK. And so I worry in terms of where these, what our landscapes are going to have to cope with, where you have those areas. The other element, of course, is things such as renewable energy. And 10, 20, whatever years ago, the thought of a wind turbine or solar panels or so on used to send, sort of people into a great deal of worry. But we are going to have those things now. And I think it's Boris's idea to sort of surround the UK seas with lots and lots of wind turbines. But that's not going to be the only answer. And so technology on land, biomass, solar, I mean, in Langham, I believe that they had a solar farm application and so on. They are going to become features of our landscape, and it's about how we handle those and about how we make sure that nature isn't compromised and that they are absorbed into our landscape. It's going to be so hard. So I don't know whether a digital lifestyle will reduce our impacts on our landscapes, or whether it will just move those impacts to somewhere that we don't necessarily see them. So sorry, Malcolm. It's hard to predict.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Sorry.
Okay, next one is from Barry.
Hi there. Hi.
Hi.
I'm a member of a group who are pushing hard to try to get Rockingham forests joined up.
Yeah.
There's some wonderful fragments of it left. In between, there's lots and lots of huge arable fields. Earlier on, you seemed to indicate that there was need for more farmland. I don't know whether that was a slip, but how do you convince someone that by joining up areas of woodland with rich habitat, you've got to do away with some farmland. You've got to do away with some arable. And I'd just like to hear your answer to the question: Can we do without that amount of arable land?
Yeah, you're right. It was a slip. We aren't making any more land, so I apologise. I apologise for that. Again, there are so many different answers to this one, but intensification of farming is one of the goals, or not, that sounds terrible, is one of the things that they're hoping will help to solve some of our environmental problems. But intensification in the right way, and that's the bit that they're still working out, unfortunately. And so how do you get more output on the same amount of land without destroying the soil, without causing flooding, and so on? And I think some of those tests and trials, I'm really looking forward to when they do report on them, because I think they're some of the questions that they're tackling at the moment, is how you can achieve all of those things. There are so many advisory bodies that help and support farmers and landowners. I mean, there's the rewilding thing at the moment, which the NEP estate has found that they have, I believe, increased their profits by rewilding the whole of their estate. They're still productive, but they're productive in a different way. And I think that they get some of their income from the amount of visitors that come and see some of the wildlife that has been recreated. So I think I'm not too familiar. I'm hoping to go down and visit because it's becoming quite a big movement now. And I'm quite intrigued to find out how you can be productive from a food perspective and make those linkages as well. I mean, you know that probably, you know, some of the things that people are starting to look at are, you know, edible forests and so on. But when a farmer is thinking about the return on their investment, so the capital goes in 1 year and it might take 25 years for that capital to be realised, is another thing. So the way that the environmental land management system is set up to work, I think hopes to solve some of those problems, to be able to provide this financial support. So it's called payments for ecosystem services, isn't it? It's where you get that money from to be able to support that type of activity. Still in its infancy.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and our final question is from Gordon and Vivian, so I'll just allow you to talk as well if you'd like to.
Hello, this is Vivian speaking. Wouldn't it be a good idea to present every child with a tree to plant when they started school? It would stress the importance of trees. And if trees became a currency of reward rather than stars or something else, it just might make a difference, because I do think we have to educate children and their parents about how important it is.
I agree. A tree is a big thing, but I grew up, going back to my roots in Charnwood Forest. We had a project where basically we took an acorn from the major oak and we distributed them around the children in the schools.
Brilliant.
And their project was that they had to grow that tree. And so not only it's like the project where you grow the sunflower, whose sunflower is getting the biggest. But what's really important is that those trees then have got somewhere to be planted. And so then we had about 5 acres of Charnwood Forest that we developed as a tree nursery just for the progeny of the major oak. And I thought that was the best way to do it myself, because I also grew up in the 80s when our local authority planted a tree in everybody's front garden, and you had the choice of the tree, and so cherry trees and different things, and it was brilliant. But then when the cherry trees started to shed their blossom over people's cars and so on, those trees were getting cut down, because the responsibility was with the house owner, and they had ultimate control. And so the great intention was lost, because within about 15 years, all of those lovely trees had been cut down and the drives had been tarmacked and, children's play areas put over the top and so on. So I do think it's a really great idea to give people the responsibility of a tree. And I love the idea as well of children having an equivalent of a memorial wood, a woodland that their school has planted that either they can visit, or there's an area in their own school grounds that they can use. We used to do some work with a school in Leicestershire, and they had an area of wilderness, and every day the teachers were out there teaching in that area of wilderness, whether it was maths or biology or English or whatever. And so for those children, they grew up thinking that being in nature was normal. That's how you learn things, and so there's much. Well, your idea there, Vivian, kind of links into so many different other ways that you can engage with children. I think it's fabulous. It's about finding that tree nursery where they all can be looked after as well.
Yes, and I think it's, if you don't mind me saying one or two more words, I think it's really, really important that children understand that a tree is a living thing, and that it has to have a proper place to grow, just like they're living things, and they need proper places to grow, and they need proper food and proper care and so on. And I think the only way to do it is to give the child the responsibility of growing and tending for the tree themselves. It doesn't have to be on their own property. I think you can have a designated place, but I do think it's very important that they get the chance to do that and say, this is my tree, wherever it happens to be. They can point at it and go, that's my tree, and I take care of it.
I like the idea as well, because it helps them to think beyond their own lifespan.
Yes.
A guinea pig and a mouse and a gerbil and so on, are very often the first encounters that young people have with another living thing that they're responsible for. And so having that, I love that idea. Yeah. Fab.
Okay, I think that's all the questions in the Q&A box. If anybody's got any last ones that they want to drop in, do so now, or raise your hand if you'd like to have your microphone turned on.
There's one in the chat.
Oh, is there?
Yeah. So from Sarah.
I'll see, is Sarah still with us? I can't, Sarah might have left. I can't find anyone called Sarah.
Okay. So Sarah Hatherall asks to all the panelists, why isn't it globally joined up thinking? Why can not cut down a single tree, yet they can cut down tons of rainforest? I'm guessing that she's talking about governments and businesses and so on. Yeah, again, that's it goes back to thinking about our one planet living, doesn't it? And it's about our own impacts upon the choices that we make. And so the food that we buy, the furniture that we buy, the places that things come from, you know, all have that impact beyond just our own gate, our own country, and so on. And mindfulness is a big word at the moment. And if we were mindful when we went into our shops and we looked at the packaging and we thought about where things come from and what would be going on in that landscape to be able to provide us with that item, I think would be a very good shift of our cultural sort of intelligence, if you like, you know, spending a little bit more time in the supermarket, if that's where we're getting our food from, really thinking hard about where things are. And maybe that's something that that supermarkets can help with, is signposting us better to the things that have got the lower carbon footprint or the lowest ecological footprint, and promoting British a little bit more. It's a great opportunity, you know, we're leaving the EU, we're becoming an independent power again, you know, get the flags out for Britain, let's buy British and so on, like we did in the 70s when, you know, all the schools had stickers, you know, to remind the children to tell their parents, buy British. But yes, that is a very, very big issue that still, with a growing population, we need tougher legislation to prevent that from happening.
Yeah. Okay.
And on that note,
well, I think that's. I can't see anybody, any other questions coming in, so we'll leave it there for the evening. So thank you, Kate. That's been a great talk, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm not sure where the other Kate has gone.
well,
I'll let Kate.
Thank you for having me, and it's been lovely to talk to everybody and to meet you all virtually as well. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's been really an enlightening talk, and apologies to everyone again for the technical issues, but thank you so much for those that stuck around. Most of you did, so that's brilliant. Oh, we've got a message coming in from Gordon and Vivian. Thank you very much. Just to those that are left, just quickly to say that if you want to find out any more information about our local groups that have organised this programme of talks, or check out the talks we've got coming up for the rest of the year, just go to our website at www.lrwt.org.uk. Thanks again, Kate, and I'll let the other Kate wrap up the evening for us, and we'll hopefully see everybody again soon.
Okay, well, thank you, Kate, for an amazing talk. I've got so many questions that I'll have to talk to you about those later. I think that there's all sorts of questions over the impact of Brexit on farming and whether farmers will actually constructively carry on with their stewardship role when they're going to be paid by the results. So are the results going to give them enough payment to continue or not? Lots of questions around there. The other one, which I just thought of, is the link between cutting down a single tree or HS2 cutting down a whole ancient forest. But I won't ask you to respond to those just at the moment. There are so many questions that have come out of your talk. It was fascinating, really interesting. I'll have another chat to you at another time. So thank you so much. Thanks for persevering through all your technical problems.
Yes.
And thanks to Harriet for orchestrating it all as well. Thank you and thanks to everyone in the audience, those that are still remaining. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Okay,
night.
good night. Thank you. Big clap from here anyway.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. To everyone else.